The town hall was held in the old community center on Maple Street, a building with creaky wooden floors, mismatched folding chairs, and a stage that looked like it hadn't been painted since the 1990s. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a pale glow over the small crowd that had gathered on a cool Tuesday evening. Outside, autumn leaves swirled in the breeze, and the smell of damp earth and distant wood smoke drifted through the open windows. It felt like any other local meeting, quiet, routine, maybe even a little sleepy. Karoline Leavitt stood at the front, calm and collected in a navy blazer and simple blouse. She wasn't new to these kinds of events, but she never treated them like formalities. To her, every town hall was a chance to listen, to connect, to understand what people were really going through. Still, she knew the drill. Introduce herself, recap recent work, answer questions, and wrap up before anyone got restless. Most nights followed the same rhythm: polite applause, a few predictable questions about taxes or road repairs, and then everyone headed home. Tonight felt no different at first. She opened with a warm smile and a quick thank you to the organizers. She spoke about recent efforts to improve local infrastructure and support small businesses, keeping her words clear and grounded. No jargon, no political fluff. The audience nodded along. Some scribbled notes. A few checked their phones. No one seemed particularly excited, but no one looked upset either. It was just normal. She moved into the Q&A portion, inviting anyone with a question to raise their hand. A woman near the front asked about school funding. Karoline gave a thoughtful answer, referencing specific budget proposals and community feedback sessions. Then a man in a flannel shirt asked about potholes on Oak Ridge Road. She laughed lightly. "Believe me, I've hit that one too," and promised to follow up with the Public Works Department. The room stayed calm, almost comfortable in its predictability. But then, near the back row, a hand went up. It wasn't a dramatic gesture, just a slow, steady lift of an arm from a man sitting alone in the corner. He wore a faded brown leather jacket, slightly too big for his frame, and a baseball cap pulled low over his forehead. His face was lined with years, his posture stiff but not unfriendly. He didn't call out or wave, he just waited patiently, until Karoline made eye contact and nodded in his direction. "Go ahead," she said, gesturing to the mic stand near the aisle. The man stood slowly, as if his knees needed a moment to agree. He walked with a slight limp, one hand resting lightly on the back of a chair for balance. When he reached the microphone, he adjusted it with care, his fingers rough and calloused. For a second, he just looked at Karoline, not with anger, not with suspicion, but with something quieter, harder to name. There was a pause. Long enough that the room began to shift. Someone coughed, a child whispered to their parent, the hum of the light seemed louder. Karoline didn't rush him. She waited, hands clasped loosely in front of her, giving him space. Then he spoke. "I'm not here to ask a question," he said, his voice low but steady, carrying easily in the quiet room. I wanted to say something." A few eyebrows lifted. This wasn't typical. Most people came with a specific concern, a bill, a policy, a complaint. But this man didn't seem interested in any of that. He took a breath, glanced around at the audience, then looked back at Karoline. "I served," he said simply. 22 years, Army, 2 tours overseas. Came home thinking I'd done my part, that the country would have my back like I had theirs." He paused again, not for effect, but because the words seemed heavy. He swallowed, then continued. "But coming home, it wasn't like they said it would be. Paperwork got lost. Appointments canceled. Benefits delayed for months. My wife got sick while I was trying to navigate all of it. We lost our house. Not because we were careless, because the system moved too slow and no one was really listening." His voice didn't rise. There was no bitterness, just a deep, quiet ache. People in the audience sat up straighter. Phones were put away. Even the little kids stopped fidgeting. Karoline listened, her expression shifting from polite attentiveness to something more real. Concern, empathy, maybe even shame. She didn't interrupt. She didn't jump in with a promise or a statistic. She just stood there, human to human, letting his words land. "I'm not blaming you," he added, softer now. "You weren't there, but I see you up here talking about plans and policies, and I just needed someone in your position to hear this, not as a voter, not as a number, but as a person who gave everything and still feels invisible." He stepped back from the mic, almost like he was surprised he'd said so much. He gave a small nod, more to himself than to anyone else, and started to turn away. But Karoline moved quickly.
"Wait," she said gently.
"Thank you. Truly. That took courage." He paused, then turned back slightly, giving the faintest nod. The room stayed silent for a long moment. Not awkward, but respectful. Like everyone had just witnessed something rare. Not a performance. Not a political moment, but a real exchange between two people who'd never met before, yet suddenly understood each other a little better. Karoline took a breath. She could have pivoted back to her talking points. She could have offered a rehearsed line about supporting veterans. But something in his words, the honesty, the lack of demand, just the raw truth of it, made her choose differently. "You're right," she said. "We talk a lot about what we're going to do, but sometimes we forget to ask what's already happening, to people like you. And that's on us." She looked out at the crowd, her voice firmer now, but still warm. "That's why these town halls matter. Not because I have all the answers, but because you have the stories that shape the questions." A few people nodded. Someone clapped softly, then another joined in until the whole room was applauding. Not wildly, but sincerely. The kind of applause that says, "We heard that too." The veteran didn't smile, but his shoulders relaxed just a little. He gave Karoline one last look, something like gratitude, maybe hope, before walking slowly back to his seat. And just like that, the evening changed. What had started as a routine stop on a busy schedule became something else entirely. A reminder that behind every policy, every headline, every campaign promise, there are real lives lived with dignity, struggle, and quiet strength. Karoline finished the town hall a little later than planned. She answered a few more questions, but the mood had shifted. People asked deeper things now, about mental health access, about job retraining, about how to make sure no one falls through the cracks. She didn't have perfect answers, but she listened like she meant it. As she packed up her notes and said goodbye to the organizers, she glanced toward the back row. The man in the leather jacket was gone, but his words stayed, echoing not just in the room but in her mind. She walked out into the cool night air, the stars just starting to appear above the trees. For the first time in a while, she didn't think about polls or press or next week's schedule. She just thought about one person, one story, and how everything she did from here on out should honor moments like this, not for politics but for people. The next morning came in soft and gray, the kind of autumn day where the sky seems to hold its breath. Karoline woke earlier than usual, not because of an alarm, but because her mind wouldn't settle. She lay in bed for a while, staring at the ceiling, replaying the town hall in her head. The polite questions, the usual concerns, and then him, the veteran. The way he'd walked to the mic like he wasn't sure he belonged there, but went anyway. The quiet weight in his voice when he said, "I just needed someone to hear this." She made coffee, wrapped her hands around the warm mug, and sat by the window. Outside, leaves drifted down from the maple tree in the yard, landing silently on the damp grass. She thought about how easy it would have been to brush off his words, to thank him politely and move on, like so many others probably had before. But something about the way he spoke without blame or theatrics stuck with her. It wasn't a demand. It was a gift. The gift of truth. Later that day, she called her team. Not for a strategy session or a media update, just a simple request. "Find out who he was," she said. "Not for a photo op or a quote. Just, I want to make sure he's okay, and if he's willing, I'd like to talk again." Her assistant hesitated. "Are you sure? We've got the Dover event tomorrow and the radio interview." "I know," Karoline said gently. "But this matters too." By mid-afternoon, they had a name, James McAllister. Retired U.S. Army Sergeant. Served from 98 to 2020. 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. Lives alone now, about 20 minutes outside town. No social media presence. No public complaints. Just a quiet life slipping through the cracks of a system that's supposed to catch people like him. Karoline didn't call the press. She didn't draft a statement. Instead, she wrote a short note, just a few lines, thanking him for his honesty and asking if he'd be open to meeting for coffee. She had it hand-delivered to the address they found, along with a local cafe gift card. No fanfare, no cameras, just one person reaching out to another. 2 days passed with no reply. She tried not to read too much into it. Maybe he didn't want to be involved. Maybe he'd said all he needed to say. That was fair. She respected that. Then on Thursday afternoon, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Coffee's fine, but not at that cafe. Too many people. There's a bench by the river trail, 10 a.m. Saturday if you're serious. She smiled. He was testing her, and she liked that. Saturday morning arrived crisp and clear. She wore jeans, a sweater, and a light jacket. No blazer, no campaign pin. She parked a block away from the trailhead and walked the rest, her boots crunching on fallen leaves. The river glistened in the morning sun, ducks gliding across the surface, kids laughing on the far bank. It felt like a different world from the fluorescent-lit town hall. He was already there, sitting on the wooden bench, hands resting on his knees. He wore the same leather jacket, but today his cap was off, revealing close-cropped silver hair and tired eyes that still held a spark of sharpness. When he saw her, he didn't stand, but he nodded. "You came," he said. "I said I would," she replied, sitting beside him, not too close, giving him space. They sat in silence for a minute, watching the water. No rush, no agenda, just two people sharing a bench on a quiet morning. Finally, he spoke. "Most folks don't show up unless there's a camera rolling." "I'm not most folks," she said, not boastfully, just stating a fact. He gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Guess not." They talked then, not about policy or politics, but about life. He told her about his wife, gone 5 years now, taken by cancer while he was tangled in VA paperwork. About how he'd sold his truck just to keep the lights on during a gap in benefits. About the pride he still felt in serving even when the country forgot him. She listened. Really listened. Not to respond, not to fix, just to understand. At one point he turned to her. "Why'd you come, really?" She thought for a moment. "Because you reminded me why I got into this. Not for power or headlines, but because people like you deserve to be seen. Not as a veteran issue or a talking point, just as someone who matters." He looked away, blinking fast. Then he nodded again, slower this time. They talked for over an hour. He told her about other vets he knew. Men and women sleeping in cars, skipping meals, too proud to ask for help. He described a system full of good intentions but broken in the places that hurt the most. Delays, bureaucracy, impersonal calls from faceless offices. "What if," she said carefully, "we tried something different? Not another big program with fancy brochures, but something local, personal, like a network of volunteers who actually go to people's homes, help them navigate the system, connect them with real resources." He raised an eyebrow. "You'd trust regular folks with that?" "More than I trust a call center in another state," she said. He was quiet for a long time. "Then I'd help, if you're serious." "I am," she said. They made a plan right there on the bench, simple, practical. Start with a pilot in their county. Recruit retired nurses, teachers, even other vets who'd been through the maze and knew the way out. Train them. Give them real support. Measure what works, drop what doesn't. No press release. No ribbon cutting. Just action. As they stood to leave, he extended his hand. She shook it, firm, warm, real. "Don't make promises you can't keep," he said. "I won't," she replied, "but I'll keep the ones I make." He nodded once, turned, and walked slowly down the path, his silhouette fading into the golden morning light. Karoline stayed a moment longer, watching the river. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like a candidate. She felt like a person doing what was right, because it was right, not because it was strategic. Back in her car, she called her team. "Cancel the generic Veterans Roundtable next week," she said. "We're doing something better. And I need you to find every retired service member in this county who's willing to help build it, with or without a title." That night, she sat at her kitchen table with a notebook, sketching out ideas by lamplight. No jargon, no spin, just clear human steps. Call Maria at the community center. Ask Pastor Lee about space in the church basement. Reach out to the local pharmacy about free blood pressure checks. It wasn't glamorous. It wouldn't trend online, but it was real. And somewhere on a quiet street outside town, a man who'd given decades to his country finally felt like someone was walking beside him. Not ahead, not behind, but right there. That, Karoline thought as she turned off the lamp, was worth more than any headline. The first real test came sooner than anyone expected. Just 10 days after the Riverside conversation, a cold front rolled in, bringing rain that turned streets slick and sidewalks empty. Karoline was in her office reviewing a list of potential volunteers for the new outreach effort when her phone rang. It was James, Mac, as he'd quietly asked her to call him. "There's a guy," he said, voice low and urgent. "Name's Ray. Served with me in '07, lives in a trailer off Route 12, heater's out. No power, he's got COPD and it's dropping below freezing tonight." She didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way." "No," he said quickly. "Not you alone. Bring the nurse, the one from the clinic. And maybe that young fella who fixes cars? The one who said he'd help?" She knew who he meant. A former Marine who ran a small auto shop and had signed up after hearing about the project through a buddy. "I'll call them," she said. "Meet you there in 20. What followed wasn't a photo op. There were no cameras, no press, not even a social media post. Just 3 people pulling up to a weathered trailer in the fading afternoon light, rain tapping softly on their jackets. Mac was already there, standing under the awning, arms crossed, face tight with worry. Ray opened the door before they even knocked. He was thin, wrapped in a blanket despite the damp chill, his breath shallow. He didn't say much, just nodded, eyes flickering between Mac and Karoline like he wasn't sure if he was dreaming this help or if it was real. The nurse, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and steady hands, went straight to work checking his vitals while the mechanic, quiet, focused, headed to the back to look at the furnace. Karoline stayed in the living room, making tea on a hot plate and listening as Mac gently coaxed Ray into talking about what had gone wrong. Turns out, Ray's disability claim had been stuck in review for 8 months. His power got cut off last week. He'd been too proud to ask anyone, convinced he'd figure it out like always. But this time, his body said no. As the nurse confirmed his oxygen levels were dangerously low, she called a mobile health unit she knew could bring a portable concentrator by evening. The mechanic came back, wiping grease off his hands. "Furnace is shot," he said, "but I've got an old space heater in my truck. It's clean, safe, just needs an outlet." "There's no power," Karoline reminded him. "Then we'll run an extension for my van," he said simply. "It's got an inverter. I've done it before for my uncle. No grand speeches, no red tape, just people helping people." By dusk, the trailer was warm. Ray sat wrapped in a donated quilt sipping tea, color slowly returning to his cheeks. The nurse left instructions and a number to call any time. The mechanic promised to check the furnace again next week and see if he could rig a temporary fix. Mac stayed behind to talk, really talk, with his old friend, the kind of conversation that only happens when 2 people have seen the same kind of war and survived the peace. Karoline didn't leave right away. She sat on the porch with Mac as the rain eased into a mist. "This is what I meant," he said quietly. "Not big promises, just showing up," she nodded. "We'll build more of this. Not just for Ray, for anyone who's falling through the cracks." He looked at her then, not with skepticism but something close to trust. "You're different," he said. "Most folks talk about serving those who served. You actually did." She didn't take it as praise. She took it as responsibility. Back home that night, soaked and exhausted, she didn't draft a victory statement. Instead, she opened her laptop and started typing a new plan, one that didn't rely on government grants or waiting for approval from distant offices. She called it Neighbor to Neighbor. The idea was simple. Train local volunteers, vets, nurses, teachers, retirees to check in on isolated veterans, help them file paperwork, connect them with food, heat, medical care. No bureaucracy. Just boots on the ground and hearts wide open. She sent the draft to Mac the next morning. He replied an hour later. "Start with 10. I know who to call." Within a week, they had 12 volunteers. All had served. All had struggled. All wanted to make sure no one else felt alone. They met in the church basement, not for a rally, but for a real talk. Karoline didn't stand at a podium. She sat in a circle with them, coffee and paper cups, and asked one question. "What do you wish someone had done for you when you came home?" The stories poured out. Delayed benefits, ignored calls, nights sleeping in cars, shame that kept them from asking for help. But also moments of grace. A neighbor who shoveled their driveway. A stranger who paid their electric bill. A VA clerk who stayed late to fix a form. From those stories, they built their rules. Always knock. Never assume. Bring help, not just questions. Follow through. Even if it takes weeks. Never make someone feel like a burden. The work spread quietly. A retired teacher started helping vets fill out online forms at the library. A local diner began offering free meals to anyone with a veteran ID on slow Tuesdays. A high school shop class built insulated window inserts for older vets' homes. None of it made national news. But in that corner of New Hampshire, something real was growing. Not from the top down, but from the ground up. Then came the moment no one planned for. At a small community event, a fall festival with hay rides and apple cider, a local reporter spotted Karoline helping an elderly vet into a heated tent. Curious, she asked what they were doing. Karoline explained briefly, without fanfare. The reporter, moved by the simplicity of it, wrote a short piece for the local paper. When the system fails, neighbors step in. A reader recorded a 30-second clip of Karoline and Mac talking to a group of volunteers and posted it online. It wasn't polished. There was wind noise, someone's dog barking in the background. But people shared it. Not because it was slick, but because it felt true. Within days, messages poured in from other towns. Can we start this here? My brother needs this. I'm a nurse. How do I help? Karoline didn't take credit. She pointed to Mac, to the volunteers, to the community. This isn't mine, she told a radio host who called for an interview. It belongs to everyone who showed up when it mattered. And through it all, Mac remained steady, sometimes in the background, sometimes speaking up, always watching. He wasn't a symbol. He was a person, and he made sure the work stayed that way. One evening, as they packed up supplies after a home visit, he turned to her and said, "You could have walked away after that town hall, said your piece and moved on." She looked at him. "Why would I? You gave me the most important thing, truth." He smiled just a little. "Then don't waste it." She wouldn't, because now it wasn't just about policy or politics. It was about people, real, breathing, struggling, hoping people, and the quiet courage it takes to reach out a hand, even when no one's watching. And in that truth, something powerful was being rebuilt, not just for veterans, but for all of them. The attention came quietly at first. Just a few emails, a handful of calls from nearby towns asking how they could start something like Neighbor to Neighbor. Karoline didn't treat it like a campaign win. She treated it like a responsibility. Every message got a reply. Every question got an answer. She even set up a simple shared drive with checklists, contact sheets, and templates for volunteers. Nothing fancy, just practical tools anyone could use. But then, a local TV station ran a short segment. Not during prime time, just a 2-minute piece at the end of the evening news. They showed footage of volunteers delivering firewood to an older vet's home, helping someone fill out a benefits form at the library, Max sitting on a porch talking with a man who hadn't left his house in months. The reporter didn't use dramatic music or sweeping claims. She just said, "In a time when many feel forgotten, a group of neighbors decided to remember." That clip got shared, not by bots or algorithms, but by real people, teachers, nurses, retirees who saw themselves in the story. A veteran in Maine wrote, "This is what we've been missing, not more programs, but more people who care." A high school student in Vermont asked if she could start a youth volunteer team. A retired electrician offered to drive 2 hours to help wire homes for free. Karoline's team scrambled to keep up, but she insisted on one rule: no scaling up unless the heart stayed the same. "If it starts feeling like a brand," she told them, "we've already lost," so they kept it human. Every new volunteer met with someone who'd been through the program. Every story was told with permission, and only if it helped someone else feel less alone. They never used photos of people in distress, never quoted someone without checking first, never turned pain into content. It was this care, this quiet respect that made the difference. Then came the unexpected moment that changed everything. A national podcast host, known for deep, thoughtful interviews, reached out, not to grill Karoline on policy, but to talk about the idea behind the work. She agreed, but only if Mac came too. "This isn't my story," she said. "It's ours." The interview happened on a rainy Thursday in a borrowed studio at a community college. No fancy mics, no makeup team, just 2 chairs, 2 cups of coffee, and an hour of honest conversation. The host asked Mac why he spoke up that night at the town hall. He thought for a long time before answering. "I didn't think anyone would listen," he said, "but I was tired of being invisible. Not because I wanted pity, just because I wanted to be seen. Like a person, not a problem to solve." When asked what surprised him most about what happened after, he looked at Karoline and said that she actually showed up. Not with a press release, with a thermos of coffee and a willingness to sit in the mess. The episode dropped on a Sunday morning. By Monday, it had been shared over 200,000 times. Messages flooded in, not from pundits or politicians, but from people. A widow in Ohio who'd lost her husband to veteran suicide, a young soldier about to deploy who worried about coming home, a grocery store clerk who'd been quietly paying for Vets' groceries for years and finally felt seen. One message stood out. It was from a man in Texas who wrote, "I haven't talked to anyone in 3 years, but after hearing that interview, I called the VA today, just to start. Thank you for reminding me I'm not nothing." Karoline read that email 3 times. Then she printed it and pinned it to her office wall. Not as proof of success, but as a reminder of why this mattered. The attention brought challenges too. Some critics called it just a feel-good story that ignored systemic issues. Others accused her of using veterans for political gain. She didn't lash out. She just kept doing the work and invited skeptics to come see it for themselves. A few did. One journalist from a major outlet spent a week shadowing volunteers. He expected spin. What he found was a retired teacher spending her Saturday helping a vet apply for hearing aids, a teenager teaching an older man how to use Zoom to see his grandkids, Mac sitting in a hospital waiting room with someone who had no one else. His article didn't have a flashy headline. It was called "The Quiet Revolution Happening in Living Rooms," and it ended with a line that stuck with people. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is show up like you mean it. Back home, the work kept growing but carefully. They trained new volunteer coordinators, created a simple hotline staffed by vets themselves, partnered with a local hardware store to offer free weatherproofing kits. Everything was low-cost, low-tech, high-heart. Karoline made sure she stayed involved, not as a figurehead but as a participant. She still went on home visits, still filled out forms, still sat on porches in the rain, listening more than speaking. One afternoon, she visited a woman named Helen, a Navy veteran in her late 60s who'd been living alone since her husband passed. Her roof was leaking, her fridge was empty, and she hadn't left the house in weeks. When Karoline knocked, Helen opened the door with a mix of suspicion and hope. They spent the afternoon patching the roof with a tarp, thanks to a volunteer roofer, stocking the pantry, and just talking. Helen hadn't cried in years, but that day she did. Not out of sadness, but relief. "I forgot what it felt like," she whispered, "to not be a burden." Karoline hugged her. "You never were." Later, driving home, Karoline realized something. This wasn't just helping veterans. It was healing a community. People who'd felt disconnected, both those giving and those receiving, were finding purpose again. The mechanic who fixed furnaces said it gave him back his pride. The retired teacher said it reminded her why she loved helping people in the first place. Even Mac changed. He still walked with that same careful limp, still wore that worn leather jacket, but his eyes were lighter now. He started mentoring younger vets, not with lectures, but with shared silence and strong coffee. He even agreed to speak at a school career day, not about war, but about coming home. At a small gathering to thank volunteers, someone asked Karoline if this would become a national program. She looked around the room, at the nurse who'd driven an hour in snow to deliver medicine, the teenager who'd built a ramp for a wheelchair, Mac quietly refilling coffee cups, and said, "It already is. Not because of me, because of all of you." And in that moment, no one cared about headlines or optics. They just cared about each other, because real change doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, through a knock on a door, a shared meal, a hand held in silence. And sometimes that whisper is enough to bring someone back from the edge. That's what they were building. Not a movement with a logo, but a network of care. With no center, no leader, just people choosing every day to see each other. And that, more than any policy or speech, was what made the difference. Winter had settled in deep by the time the first anniversary of that town hall rolled around. Snow blanketed the streets, and the community center, the same one with the creaky floors and buzzing lights, was warm inside, filled with the smell of coffee, cinnamon rolls, and wet boots by the door. It wasn't a campaign event. No banners, no podium, no press pool waiting outside. Just a gathering of people who'd become something more than volunteers. They'd become a kind of family. Karoline arrived early, carrying a stack of handmade thank you cards from local school kids. Each one had a drawing: a house with smoke coming from the chimney, a dog curled up by a vet's feet, two stick figures holding hands in the snow. She laid them on a table near the window, where the morning light caught the glitter glue and crayon hearts. Mac came in a little later, his boots leaving damp prints on the floor. He wore the same leather jacket, but this time there was a small patch on the sleeve, a simple emblem the group had designed together. Two hands, one helping the other stand. No words, just action. He nodded at Karoline. You kept your word. She smiled. So did you. They didn't say much after that. They didn't need to. The room itself told the story. Over the past year, Neighbor to Neighbor had quietly spread to 7 counties. Not through funding drives or viral stunts, but through word of mouth, through people seeing a neighbor helped and thinking, I could do that too. A retired postal worker in the next town over started a ride share for medical appointments. A group of high schoolers raised money to fix porches and steps so older vets wouldn't fall in the ice. A local diner now kept a warm meal list. Anyone on it could walk in, no questions asked, and get a hot plate and a seat by the window. None of it was perfect. There were missteps, a form filled out wrong, a missed call, a volunteer who burned out and needed support themselves. But they learned, they adapted, they apologized when they needed to, and they kept going. What surprised Karoline most wasn't the scale, it was the shift in how people saw each other. Strangers became allies. Isolation gave way to connection. And the veterans? They weren't just recipients anymore. They were leaders, mentors, friends. One man who hadn't spoken to anyone outside his home in 2 years now ran a weekly coffee hour at the library. A woman who'd lost her son to suicide started a grief circle that met in her living room every Thursday. Mac himself had begun visiting new vets returning from service, not to give advice, but just to say, I'm here. You're not alone. That morning, as people drifted in, some in uniform, some in work boots, some in wheelchairs, they didn't wait for a speech. They hugged. They laughed. They shared stories over paper plates. Karoline watched from the edge of the room, not as a candidate, but as someone who'd been changed by all of it. She thought back to that first night. The veteran stepping up to the mic. The silence that followed. The way her whole understanding of service had shifted in those few minutes. She hadn't known then that it would lead here, but she was glad it had. Later, someone asked if she'd say a few words. She stepped forward, not to a mic, just into the circle. I came here a year ago thinking I had answers, she began, voice soft but clear. Turns out, I just needed to learn how to listen. You all taught me that, not through speeches or slogans, but through showing up day after day even when no one was watching. She looked at Mac. Especially you. He gave a small shrug, but his eyes shone. This wasn't my idea, she went on. It was ours. And it only works because we treat each other like people. Not problems to fix, not votes to win, but human beings who deserve dignity, care, and a little kindness. A quiet murmur of agreement moved through the room. Afterward, as people cleaned up and bundled back into their coats, Mac walked over to her. You could have taken credit, he said. Called it Karoline's Veterans Initiative or something flashy. She shook her head. Then it wouldn't be real. He nodded. Good. They stood together by the door, watching snow fall under the streetlights. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he said, You know, I used to think no one cared. That after everything, I'd just disappear. You didn't, she said gently. No, he agreed. Because people like you decided to see me. She didn't correct him. She knew it wasn't really about her. It was about the choice, made again and again to look someone in the eye and say, I'm here. In the weeks that followed, life went on. Karoline still had a busy schedule. Meetings, debates, town halls in other towns. But now, no matter where she went, she carried that lesson with her. She started every event by asking, Who's here that no one's listening to? And she made sure to find them. Back home, the work continued without her needing to lead it. The group had grown its own roots. They met monthly, not to report to her, but to support each other. They solved problems together: how to get internet to a remote cabin, how to find a lost service dog, how to help a vet reconnect with a daughter after years of silence. None of it made national headlines. And that was okay, because real change doesn't always need an audience. Sometimes it just needs a neighbor. One evening, Karoline got a text from Mac. Just 2 words. "Ray's walking." She smiled. Ray, the man in the trailer with no heat, was now volunteering at the food pantry using a cane but standing tall. He'd even started teaching chess to kids at the rec center. She typed back, "Tell him I'm proud." A minute later, he already knows. That night, she sat on her porch under a sky full of stars, wrapped in a thick blanket. The world still felt heavy, politics loud, divisions deep, problems huge. But in her corner of it, something quiet and strong had taken hold. Not because of one person, but because of many choosing every day to care, and maybe that was enough. Because in the end, it wasn't about grand gestures or perfect solutions. It was about showing up, really showing up, for the person right in front of you. Listening, staying, trying again tomorrow. That's what they'd built. Not a program, not a legacy, just a promise passed from hand to hand. You matter. I see you. We're in this together. And in a world that often feels cold, that promise was the warmest thing of all.